although often most scholars agree that modern human behavior can be characterized by abstract thinking. Symbolic behavior, for example art, ornamentation, music, exploitation of large game, blade technology, among others. Two underlying these behaviors and technological innovations are cognitive and cultural foundations that have been documented experimentally and ethnographically. Some of these human universal patterns are cumulative cultural adaptation, social norm, language, cooperative breeding, and extensive help and cooperation beyond close kin. These traits have been viewed as largely responsible for the human replacement of Neanderthal in Western Europe, along with the climatic conditions of the last glacial maximum, and the peopling of the rest of the world. 4 Arising from differences in the archaeological record. The debate continues as to whether anatomically modern humans were behaviorally modern as well. There are many theories on the evolution of behavioral modernity. These generally fall into 2 camps: gradualist and cognitive approaches
from each other, but that the bicameral mind was experienced as a different, non-conscious mental schema wherein volition in the face of novel stimuli was mediated through a linguistic control mechanism and experienced as auditory verbal hallucination. The bicameral mentality would be non-conscious in its inability to reason and articulate about mental contents through meta-reflection, reacting without explicitly realizing and without the meta-reflective ability to give an account of why one did so. The bicameral mind will thus lack meta-consciousness, autobiographical memory, and the capacity for executive ego functions such as deliberate mind wandering.
James uses governmental bicameralism as a metaphor to describe a mental state in which the experiences and memories of the right hemisphere of the brain are transmitted to the left hemisphere.
James uses governmental bicameralism as a metaphor to describe a mental state in which the experiences and memories of the right hemisphere of the brain are transmitted to the left hemisphere via auditory hallucinations. The metaphor is based on the idea of lateralization of brain function, although each half of a normal human brain is constantly communicating with the other through the corpus callosum. The metaphor is not meant to imply that the 2 halves of the bicameral brain were cut off from each other, but that the bicameral mind was experienced as a different, non-conscious mental schema wherein volition in the face of novel stimuli was mediated through a linguistic control mechanism and experienced as auditory verbal hallucination. The bicameral mentality would be non-conscious in its inability to reason and articulate about mental contents through meta-reflection, reacting without explicitly realizing and without the meta-reflective ability to give an account of why one did so. The bicameral mind would thus lack meta-consciousness, autobiographical memory, and the capacity for executive ego functions such as deliberating and wondering, and conscious introspection of mental content. When bicamerality as a method of social control was no longer adaptive in complex civilizations, this mental model was replaced by the conscious mode of thought which, James argued, is grounded in the acquisition of metaphorical language learned by exposure to narrative practice. According to James, ancient people in the bicameral state of mind would have experienced the world in a manner that has some similarities to that of a schizophrenic, rather than making conscious evaluations in novel or unexpected situations. The person would hallucinate a voice or God giving admonitory advice or commands and obey. Without question, one would not be at all conscious of one's own thought processes per se. Research into command hallucinations that often direct the behavior of those labeled schizophrenic, as well as other voice hearers, supports James's predictions. James built a case for this hypothesis that human brains existed in a bicameral state until as recently as 3,000 years ago by citing evidence from many diverse sources including historical literature. He took an interdisciplinary approach, drawing data from many different fields. James asserted that until roughly the times written about in Homer's Iliad, humans did not generally have the self-awareness characteristic of consciousness as most people experience it today. Rather, the bicameral individual was guided by mental commands believed to be issued by external gods. Commands which were recorded in ancient myths, legends and historical accounts. This is exemplified not only in the commands given to characters in ancient epics but also the very muses of Greek mythology which sang the poems. The ancients figuratively heard muses as the direct For example, in the Iliad and sections of the Old Testament no mention is made of any kind of cognitive processes, such as introspection, and there is no apparent indication that the writers were self-aware. According to James, the older portions of the Old Testament, such as the Book of Amos, a few or none of the features of some later books of the Old Testament, such as Ecclesiastes, as well as later works, such as Homer's Odyssey, which show indications of a profoundly different kind of mentality - an early form of consciousness. 3. In ancient times, James noted, gods were generally much more numerous and much more anthropomorphic than in modern times, and speculates that this was because each bicameral person had their own god who reflected their own desires and experiences. For he also noted that in ancient societies the corpses of the dead were often treated as though still alive, being seated, dressed and even fed, as a form of ancestor worship. And James argued that the dead bodies were presumed to be still living in the source of auditory hallucinations. 3. This adaptation to the village communities of 100 individuals or more form the core of religion. Unlike today's hallucinations, the voices of ancient times were structured by cultural norms to produce a seamlessly functioning society. In ancient Greek culture there is often mention of the logos, which is a very similar concept. It was a type of guiding voice that was heard as from a seemingly external source. James inferred that these voices came from the right brain counterparts of the left brain language centers - specifically the counterparts to Wernicke's area and Broca's area. These regions are somewhat dormant in the right brains of most modern humans. But James noted that some studies show that auditory hallucinations correspond to increased activity in these areas of the brain. 3. James notes that even in modern times when there is no consensus as to the cause or origins of schizophrenia, James argues that schizophrenia is a vestige of humanity's earlier bicameral state. 3. Recent evidence shows that many schizophrenics do not just hear random voices but experience command hallucinations instructing their behavior or urging them to commit certain acts. Full citation needed as support for James's argument. These command hallucinations are little different from the commands from gods which feature prominently in ancient stories. 3. Indirect evidence supporting James's theory that hallucinations once played an important role in human mentality can be found in the recent book Muses, Madmen, and Prophets. Rethinking the History, Science, and Meaning of Auditory Hallucination by Daniel Smith. James theorized that a shift from bicameralism marked the beginning of introspection and consciousness as we know it today. According to James, this bicameral mentality began malfunctioning or breaking down during the second millennium BC. He speculates that primitive ancient societies tended to collapse periodically, as in Egypt's intermediate periods and the periodically vanishing cities of the Mayas, as changes in the environment strained the socio-cultural equilibria sustained by this bicameral mindset. The Bronze Age collapse of the second millennium BC led to mass migrations and created a rash of unexpected situations and stresses that required ancient minds to become more flexible and creative. Self-awareness, or consciousness, was the culturally evolved solution to this problem. This necessity of communicating commonly observed phenomena among individuals who shared no common language or cultural upbringing encouraged those communities to become self-aware to surviving a new environment. Thus consciousness, like bicamerality, emerged as a neurological adaptation to social complexity in a changing world. James further argues that divination, prayer and oracles arose during this breakdown period in an attempt to summon instructions from the gods whose voices could no longer be heard. 3. The consultation of special bicamerally operative individuals, or of divination by casting lots and so forth, was a response to this loss. A transitional era depicted, for example, in the book of 1 Samuel. It was also evidenced in children who could communicate with the gods. But as their neurology was set by language and society, they gradually lost that ability. Those who continued professing being bicameral according to James could be killed. 6. 7 leftovers of the bicameral mind today, according to James, include religion, hypnosis, possession, schizophrenia and the general sense of need for external authority and decision-making. James's hypothesis remains controversial. The primary scientific criticism has been that the conclusions James drew had no basis in neuropsychiatric fact. 8. Richard Dawkins in The God Illusion, 2006, wrote of the origin of consciousness in the breakdown of the bicameral mind that it is one of those books that is either complete rubbish or a work of consummate genius. Nothing in between. Probably the former, but I'm hedging my bets. 9. Some early 1977 Reviewers consider James's hypothesis worthy and offer conditional support, arguing the notion deserves further study. 1011 The idea that language is a necessary component of subjective consciousness and more abstract forms of thinking has gained the support of proponents including Andy Clark, Daniel Dennett, William H. Calvin, Merlin Donald, John Limber, Howard Margolis, Peter Kolyuthas, and Jose Luis Bermudez. Clarification needed 12 Williams, 2010. 13 defended James against the criticism of Bloch. 1981. 14 Clarification needed in a 1987 letter to the American Journal of Psychiatry. H. Stephen Moffat questioned why James's theory was left out of a discussion on auditory hallucinations. By Assad and Shapiro. Year needed. In response published in the May 1987 issue, the authors reply that James' hypothesis makes for interesting reading and stimulates much thought in the receptive reader. It does not, however, adequately explained one of the central mysteries of madness: hallucination. 8 Duress. Assad and Shapiro's comment that there is no evidence for involvement of the right temporal lobe in auditory hallucination was incorrect even at that time. 1516 A number of more recent studies provide additional evidence to right hemisphere involvement in auditory hallucinations. Recent neuroimaging studies provide new evidence for James's neurological model, I.E. Auditory hallucinations arising in the right temporal parietal lobe and being transmitted to the left temporal parietal lobe. This was pointed out by Drive, Robert Olin in Lancet 17 and Rive, Leo Scher in the Journal of Psychiatry and Neuroscience 18 and further discussed in the book Reflections on the Dawn of Consciousness. 19 The philosopher Daniel Dennett suggested that James may have been wrong about some of his supporting arguments, especially the importance he attached to hallucinations, but that these things are not essential to his main thesis. 20 He also wrote that if we are going to use this top-down approach, we are going to have to be bold. We are going to have to be speculative, but there is good and bad speculation. And this is not an unparalleled activity in science. Those scientists who have no taste for this sort of speculative enterprise will just have to stay in the trenches and do without it. while the rest of us risk embarrassing mistakes and have a lot of fun. Daniel Dennett, 21. Gregory Cochran, a physicist and adjunct professor of anthropology at the University of Utah, wrote, "Genes affecting personality, reproductive strategies, cognition, are all able to change significantly over millennia time scales if the environment favors such change. And this includes the new environments we have made for ourselves. Things like new ways of making a living and new social structures. There is evidence that such changes occurred." On first reading, break. But James may have been onto something. 22 author and historian of science Maurice Berman writes, "James's description of this new consciousness is one of the best I have come across." 23 Danish science writer Torno Retranders discusses James's Mythopoeic thought is a hypothetical stage of human thought preceding modern thought, proposed by Henry Frankfurt and his wife Henriette Antonia Frankfurt in the 40s. According to this proposal, there was a mythopoeic stage in which humanity did not think in terms of generalizations and impersonal laws. Instead, humans saw each event as an act of will on the part of some personal being. This way of thinking supposedly explains the ancients' tendency to create myths, which portray events as acts of gods and spirits. A physiological motivation for this was suggested by Julian James in 1970. The term mythopoeic means myth-making, from Greek mythos, myth, and poiein, to make. A group of Near Eastern specialists used the term in their 1946 book The Intellectual Adventure of Ancient Man, an essay on speculative thought in the ancient Near East, later republished as the 1949 paperback for Philosophy, The Intellectual Adventure of Ancient Man. 1. In this book's introduction, two of the specialists, Henry and Mrs. H. Frankfurt, argue that mythopoeic thought characterizes a distinct stage of human thought that differs fundamentally from modern scientific thought. Mythopoeic thought, the Frankfurts claim, was concrete and personifying, whereas modern thought is abstract and impersonal. More basically, mythopoeic thought is pre-philosophical, while modern thought is philosophical. 2. Because of this basic contrast between mythopoeic and modern thought, the Frankfurts often used the term mythopoeic thought as a synonym for ancient thought in general. Characteristics of mythopoeic thought. Edit personalistic view of nature. Edit according to the Frankfurts. The fundamental difference between the attitudes of modern and ancient man as regards the surrounding world is this. The modern scientific man, the phenomenal world is primarily an it, for ancient hyphen and also for primitive hyphen man it is a thou. 3. In other words, modern man sees most things as impersonal objects, whereas ancient man sees most things as persons. According to the Frankfurts, ancients viewed the world this way because they didn't think in terms of universal laws. Modern thought reduces the chaos of perceptions to an order in which typical events take place according to universal laws. For example, consider a river that usually arises in the spring. Suppose that, one spring, the river fails to rise. In that case, modern thought doesn't conclude that the laws of nature have changed. Instead, it searches for a set of fixed, universal laws that can explain why the river has risen in other cases but not in this case. Modern thought is abstract. It looks for unifying principles behind diversity. In contrast, the Frankfurts argue the primitive mind cannot withdraw to that extent from perceptual reality. The later Upper Paleolithic model refers to the idea that modern human behavior arose through cognitive, genetic changes abruptly around 40,000–50,000 years ago. 5 other models focus on how modern human behavior may have arisen through gradual steps. The archaeological signatures of such behavior only appearing through demographic or subsistence changes. Similar ideas. Edit in his book The Master and His Emissary, psychiatrist Ian McGilchrist reviews scientific research into the role of the brain's hemispheres in cultural evidence, and he proposes that since the time of Plato the left hemisphere of the brain, the emissary, in the title, has increasingly taken over from the right hemisphere, the master, to our detriment. McGilchrist, while accepting Jane's intention, felt that Jane's hypothesis was the precise inverse of what happened, and that rather than a shift from bicameralism there evolved a separation of the hemispheres. 28 Michael Gazzaniga pioneered the split brain experiment, which led him to propose a similar theory called the left brain interpreter. It is now known, citation needed, that sense of agency is closely connected with lateralization. The left parietal lobe is active when visualizing actions in the first person, while the right parietal lobe is active for actions in the third person. Additionally, Wernicke's area processes the literal meaning of language, while the homologous region in the right hemisphere processes the intent of a speaker. It has been found that people with damage to the right inferior parietal cortex experience alien hand syndrome, as do people who have had a corpus callosotomy. This reverses the relationship between the right and left hemispheres posited by bicameralism. It is the left hemisphere that speaks and the right hemisphere that is responsible for self-awareness. M middle dot is middle dots are middle dot ym /noun a person sent on a special mission, usually as a diplomatic representative. Synonyms: envoy, ambassador, delegate, attaché, consul, plenipotentiary, more. The Frankfurts argue that mythopoeic thought explains the tolerance of seeming contradictions in mythology. According to the Frankfurts' theory, the ancients didn't try to unite different experiences under a universal law. Instead, they took each individual experience at face value. Therefore, they sometimes took one experience and developed a myth from it, and took a different experience and developed a different myth from it, without worrying whether those two myths contradicted each other. The ancients are likely to present various descriptions of natural phenomena side by side, even though they are mutually exclusive. 5. For example, the ancient Egyptians had 3 different creation myths. 6. According to the Frankfurts, ancient Egyptians and Mesopotamians - the Frankfurts' area of expertise - lived in a holy mythopoeic world. 7. Each natural force, each concept, was a personal being from their viewpoint. In Egypt and Mesopotamia, the divine was comprehended as immanent. The gods were in nature. 8. This immanence and multiplicity of the divine is a direct result of mythopoeic thought. Hence, the first step in the loss of mythopoeic thought was the loss of this view of the divine. The ancient Hebrews took this first step through their doctrine of a single, transcendent God. When we read in Psalm 19 that the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork, we hear a voice which mocks the beliefs of the Egyptians and Babylonians. The heavens, which were to the psalmist but a witness of God's greatness, were to the Mesopotamians the very majesty of Godhead. The God of the psalmists and the prophets was not in nature. He transcended nature and transcended, likewise, the realm of mythopoeic thought. 8. The ancient Hebrews still saw each major event as a divine act. However, they saw the divine as a single being not a myriad of spirits, one for each natural phenomenon. Moreover, they didn't see the divine as a will within nature. For them, the divine will was a force or law behind all natural events. Some Greek philosophers went further. Instead of seeing each event as an act of will, they developed a notion of impersonal, universal law. They finally abandoned mythopoeic thought, postulating impersonal laws behind all natural phenomena. 7. These philosophers may not have been scientific by today's rigid standards. Their hypotheses were often based on assumptions, not empirical data. 9. However, by the mere fact that they looked behind the apparent diversity and individuality of events, in search of underlying laws, and defied the prescriptive sanctities of religion, the Greeks broke away from mythopoeic thought. 9. Criticism. Edit. Religious scholar Robert Siegel has pointed out that the dichotomy between a personal and an impersonal view of the world is not absolute. As the Frankfurt's distinction between ancient and modern thought might suggest, any phenomenon can surely be experienced as both an it and a thou. Consider, for example, a pet and a patient. 7. Furthermore, Siegel argues, it is embarrassingly simplistic to call the ancient Near East wholly mythopoeic. The Hebrews largely non-mythopoeic, and the Greeks wholly scientific. 7. Paleolithic is amongst the oldest art known, sometimes called prehistoric art. Older possible examples include the incised ochre from Blombus Cave. Upper Paleolithic art is found in Aurignacy in Europe and the Levant some 40,000 years ago, and on the island of Sulawesi in Indonesia at a similar date, suggesting a much older origin perhaps in Africa. One cave art in Europe continued to the Mesolithic, at the beginnings of the Holocene, about 12,000 years ago, as this corresponds to the final phase of the last glacial period. Upper Paleolithic art is also known as Ice Age art, as a notable aspect of what some call the Upper Paleolithic Revolution. 2-3 and evidence for behavioral modernity. The appearance of art in part helps us define the Upper Paleolithic itself. Art helps define what makes us human. It is part of what we are or can be. E.G. Stephen Mithan, and The Mind in the Cave by David Lewis Williams. Paleolithic art includes rock and cave painting, jewelry, for 5 drawing, carving, engraving and sculpture in clay, bone, antler, 6 stone, 7 and ivory, such as the Venus figurines, and musical instruments such as flutes. Decoration was also made on functional tools, such as spear throwers, perforated batons and lamps. Common subject matters include the animals that were hunted, for example reindeer, horses, 8 bison, 9 birds, 10 and mammoth, 11 and predators and other animals that were not e.g. lions, 12 other big cats, 13 bears and the woolly rhinoceros, 14 the human form was often expressed, especially a female. Shapes 15, they often look either young, old, or pregnant. 16 men are also depicted, such as the pinhole man. The lateralization of brain function refers to how some functions or cognitive processes tend to be more dominant in one hemisphere than the other. The medial longitudinal fissure separates the human brain into two distinct cerebral hemispheres, connected by the corpus callosum. The hemispheres exhibit strong, but not complete, bilateral symmetry in both structure and function. For example, structurally, the lateral sulcus generally is longer in the left hemisphere than in the right hemisphere. And functionally, Broca's area and Wernicke's area are located in the left cerebral hemisphere for about 95% of right-handers, but about 70% of left-handers. One broad generalizations are often made in pop psychology about one side or the other having characteristic labels, such as logical for the left side or creative for the right. These labels are not supported by studies on lateralization, as lateralization does not add specialized usage from either hemisphere. Both hemispheres contribute to both kinds of processes. 3. And experimental evidence provides little support for correlating the structural differences between the sides with such broadly defined functional differences. For the extent of any modularity or specialization of brain function by area remains under investigation. If a specific region of the brain, or even an entire hemisphere, is injured or destroyed, its functions can sometimes be assumed by a neighboring region in the same hemisphere or the corresponding region in the other hemisphere, depending upon the area damaged and the patient's age. 5. When injury interferes with pathways from one area to another. Alternative, indirect connections may develop to communicate information with detached areas. Despite the inefficiencies, brain function lateralization is evident in the phenomenon of right or left-handedness. 6. And of right or left ear preference. 7. But a person's preferred hand is not a clear indication of the location of brain function. Although 95% of right-handed people have left hemisphere dominance for language, 8% of left-handed people have right hemisphere dominance for language function. Additionally, 19.8% of the left-handed have bilateral language functions. 8. Even within various language functions, for example, semantics, syntax, prosody, degree, and even hemisphere, of dominance may differ. Additionally, although some functions are lateralized, these are only a tendency. The trend across many individuals may also vary significantly as to how any specific function.
James uses governmental bicameralism as a metaphor to describe a mental state in which the experiences and memories of the right hemisphere of the brain are transmitted to the left hemisphere via auditory hallucinations. The metaphor is based on the idea of lateralization of brain function, although each half of a normal human brain is constantly communicating with the other through the corpus callosum. The metaphor is not meant to imply that the two halves of the bicameral brain were cut off. 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 Brain were cut off.